Let's say you're living in ancient Greece around 400 BCE. Most people believe the world is controlled by gods, spirits, destiny, or even mystical forces. Philosophers are arguing endlessly about what reality even is. Some say everything changes constantly, others say change is impossible. Some think the universe is made from water, others say fire, others say numbers. And then one man arrives with an idea that modern science would eventually prove parts of over 2,000 years later. The man was Democritus, a philosopher who claimed that everything in existence, from stars, animals, mountains, human beings, even your thoughts, is made from tiny invisible particles moving through empty space. He called them atomos, atoms. Today we remember him as the father of atomic theory. There's a twist, however. Democritus didn't have microscopes. He didn't have laboratories. He didn't have things like chemistry, and he didn't understand physics. He arrived at one of history's greatest scientific intuitions using nothing but logic, observation, and relentless philosophical reasoning. And somehow, he got really friggin' close. This is the story of Democritus, the laughing philosopher, the enemy of superstition, the man who tried to explain the entire universe without mythology, and one of the most underrated geniuses in human history. Early Greek philosophers were obsessed with one question: what is reality made of? Different thinkers gave different answers. Thales said everything came from water. Anaximenes said air. Heraclitus believed reality was constant change. Everything flows like fire. Parmenides argued the complete opposite of them. Change is just an illusion. According to Parmenides, nothing can come from nothing, reality cannot truly change, movement itself was logically impossible. Of course, this sounds absurd today, but his arguments were difficult to refute back then. Then came Zeno of Elea, Parmenides' student, who created paradoxes to prove motion could not exist. For example, before you walk across a room, you must first walk halfway, then halfway again infinitely. So, how can motion ever actually begin? These philosophical problems shook Greek thought to its core. The Greeks faced a crisis. If change exists, then how? If motion exists, then how? If things are constantly transforming, what remains permanent underneath all of it? Democritus would attempt to solve all of it at once. Very little survives about Democritus's personal life, but ancient sources paint a fascinating picture. He was born in Abdera, a Greek colony in Thrace, around 460 BCE. Abdera had a reputation in Greece as a city of fools. Ironically, one of history's greatest thinkers came from there. Democritus supposedly inherited a large sum and spent much of it traveling the ancient world seeking knowledge. Ancient writers claim he traveled to Egypt, Persia, Babylon, possibly India. Whether all these journeys happened is actually uncertain, but the stories reflect his reputation as a seeker of universal wisdom. He studied mathematics, astronomy, geometry, ethics, music, biology, and cosmology. He wrote dozens of books. Almost all are lost, as are with all the pre Socratics. That loss is one of the great tragedies in intellectual history, because Democritus may have been centuries ahead of his time. Democritus did not invent atomism completely alone. His teacher, or perhaps collaborator, was Leucippus. Leucippus is mysterious. Some historians debate whether he even existed, but ancient tradition credits Leucippus with originating atomic theory, while Democritus developed it into a full philosophical system. Together, they created one of the boldest ideas in history. Everything is made of atoms and the void. That's it, that's the foundation. Reality consists of two things: atoms, empty space.
Like, comment, share, subscribe, and hit that bell!
Many Greeks rejected the existence of nothingness. Parmenides argued the void could not exist because nothing cannot exist. Democritus disagreed. He argued that empty space must exist, otherwise, motion would be impossible. This solved one of the greatest philosophical problems of the age. Movement happens because atoms move through the void. Suddenly, change becomes possible. Motion becomes possible. Physical transformation became explainable, without appealing to gods or mystical forces. Democritus' atoms were not identical to modern scientific atoms, but there are some similarities that get rather close. He believed atoms were eternal, indivisible, indestructible, infinitely numerous, and always moving. Different substances existed because atoms had different shapes, sizes, arrangements, and motions. For example, sharp atoms might create bitterness, smooth atoms might create sweetness, heavy objects had dense atomic arrangements. Fire consisted of small, fast moving atoms. Everything in nature emerged from collisions and combinations of atoms. No divine planning necessary, no supernatural design, only matter and motion. This is one of the earliest forms of materialism in history. Democritus' worldview was radically mechanistic. He believed the universe operated according to necessity and natural laws, not divine intervention. Thunder was a natural process. Stars, natural process. Human beings, natural process. Thoughts, atoms moving inside the soul. Even the soul itself was material. Democritus believed the soul was composed of fine, fiery atoms distributed through the body. When the body dies, those atoms disperse. No immortal soul floating into eternity. That idea alone made philosophy deeply controversial. He was stripping magic from the cosmos and replacing it with physics. Democritus became known as the Laughing Philosopher. Ancient writers said he laughed constantly at human foolishness. While others obsessed over wealth, power, politics, and vanity, Democritus believed most human anxieties were ridiculous compared to the vastness of the cosmos. Imagine this image: a philosopher standing under the stars, laughing at kings, laughing at the greed, laughing at people's ego, because humanity takes itself too seriously. This became his legendary reputation. He contrasted sharply with Heraclitus, who was sometimes called the weeping philosopher. Heraclitus mourned human ignorance. Democritus laughed at it. Most people know Democritus for atoms, but he also developed an ethical philosophy. He believed that the goal of life was cheerfulness and tranquility. The Greek term often associated with his ethics is euthymia, a state of calm balance and inner stability, not endless pleasure, not luxury, and not at the excess of it. Instead, moderation, self control, wisdom, and intellectual clarity. He warned that uncontrolled desires create more suffering. A peaceful mind mattered more than wealth. In some ways, Democritus foreshadowed later philosophies like Stoicism, Epicureanism, and the scientific rationalism. Centuries later, Epicurus adopted and modified Democritus' atomism. Epicurus agreed that atoms exist, the universe is material, natural explanations matter, but he introduced one major change: the swerve. Epicurus believed atoms occasionally deviated unpredictably in motion. Why? To allow free will. Without randomness, reality seemed completely deterministic. Later, the Roman poet Lucretius preserved atomist philosophy in his masterpiece, De Rerum Natura, on the nature of things. Without Lucretius, atomism might have disappeared entirely. Despite his brilliance, Democritus lost the philosophical war because Aristotle rejected atomism. Aristotle believed matter was continuous, not composed of indivisible particles, and Aristotle became enormously influential for nearly 2,000 years. His philosophy dominated in medieval Christianity, Islamic philosophy, and European education. Democritus' ideas survived mostly at the margins. For centuries, atomism was overshadowed, then science returned back to it. In the 1600s and 1700s, scientists began reviving atomic ideas. Then came modern chemistry, then physics, then actual atomic theory. Scientists discovered matter truly was composed of tiny units. Now, Democritus was not completely correct. Modern atoms are divisible by protons, neutrons, electrons, and even smaller things called quarks. But the core intuition was astonishing. Reality was built from microscopic particles interacting in that space. That insight connected Democritus to modern science across more than 2 millennia. A man in sandals walking around ancient Greece using pure philosophical reasoning anticipated one of the foundations of physics itself. Now let's compare his ideas with modern science. Here's what he got right. Matter is composed of tiny particles. That's correct. Empty space exists. That is correct. Physical processes can explain nature. That is also correct. And different arrangements create different substances. Also correct in principle. What he got wrong was that atoms are indivisible. That's not true. Atoms differ mainly by shape, and that's oversimplified. There's no experimental method, and this was philosophy, not science. Democritus had intuition, modern science had evidence. Still, his conceptual leap remains incredible. Democritus matters for more than atoms. He represents a turning point in human thought, a movement away from mythological explanation towards rational explanation. He asked, what if the universe operates mechanically? That question eventually led toward physics, chemistry, materialism, and scientific inquiry. He helped lay the groundwork for the idea that nature follows understandable principles, not arbitrary supernatural whims, and that helped transform civilization itself. Democritus also believed there were infinite worlds, infinite universes, some with suns, some without, some inhabited, some empty. And that idea was definitely ahead of its time, unbelievably so. He imagined a cosmos without a center, without special human importance, without divine favoritism. Human beings were not the center of existence. We were temporary arrangements of atoms in an infinite universe. That idea still upsets people to this day. Democritus feels strangely contemporary because his worldview resembles modern scientific naturalism. He tried to explain consciousness, sensation, matter, cosmology, and ethics through rational systems instead of the mythology of the time. Even his personality feels modern. He was skeptical, very curious, irreverent, and he was cosmic in perspective. He was one of the first thinkers to fully embrace the possibility that reality might be understandable without appealing to supernatural causes. That makes him one of the intellectual ancestors of science itself. Democritus never saw an atom. He never performed a laboratory experiment. He had no telescope, no microscope, and no particle accelerator, and yet he imagined a universe built from invisible particles moving through empty space. That's one of the greatest acts of intellectual imagination in human history. He laughed at human vanity because he saw something bigger than everything, that we are tiny fragments in a vast cosmos governed by deeper laws. And now, across 2,000 years of history, science slowly moved closer to the universe he imagined. Not perfectly, but really, really close. Democritus reminds us that philosophy is not merely abstract speculation. Sometimes philosophy becomes the first draft of science. And sometimes, a thinker sitting in ancient Greece can see farther into reality than entire civilizations around him.